Let me ask you briefly about these potential nuclear byproducts of a reaction. The Japanese last week had a pronounced announcement claiming that they have achieved cold fusion and also claiming somewhat that it's completely different, even though it appears to be just a modified version of your own experiments. Yet if you talk to some of the physicists, they will say that they're still more impressed with Kevin Wolf's tritium measurements out of Texas A&M than they are with the Japanese announcement, that appears to be more convincing for the physicists who have long believed you have to come up with this tangible byproduct of a nuclear reaction. What is your analysis of what has happened in Japan and what the physicists are saying here about Kevin Wolf's measurements at Texas A&M?
What is so interesting about the measurements in Texas A&M and the measurements in India especially is that it is quite clear that that you can achieve relatively high levels of tritium. This does not exactly please us, incidentally.
That isn't what you wanted originally.
That's not what we wanted. One can begin to see something of the rationale behind the switching of the path to tritium. But quite clearly there is much more tritium than would correspond to the neutrons. Now what is very significant, I think, about the Japanese work is that they have now achieved conditions where clearly you can also get relatively high levels of neutrons. This also doesn't please us, and all we would say about that, we understand, we believe what is going on there, and we have, of course, ourselves done some other experiments as well, which would lead us to have some confidence in the Japanese as well.
Gentlemen, there's so much to ask and so much to understand about this level of experimentation. Maybe one of the questions that the viewers, that the general public has, is what's next? Where do you go in terms of developing this science? We'll explore that in just a minute. Stay with us this afternoon. We'll be right back as we explore cold fusion on Eyewitness Newsmakers. Welcome back to Eyewitness Newsmakers. The subject this afternoon, cold fusion. The experimentation, of course, at the University of Utah, and the gentlemen that are responsible for that experiment are with us today. We'd like to introduce Dr. the University of Utah and also Dr. Martin Fleischmann with England Southampton University, also now a research scientist at the University of Utah. And also joining us today is Eyewitness science specialist Ed Yeates. And Dr. Pons, if I can ask you to begin with, tell us a little of where you envision both the experimentation and the development of the concept of cold fusion, the science of cold fusion. What's the next step as you envision it?
Well, our work is going to be focused on a very large-scale experiment of investigating the parameters which are significant in the experiment. We know what most of these parameters are. We know what chemicals should be used in the system that may be better or worse than the ones we started with. So we need to develop a very large-scale number of experiments to investigate what changing these parameters will do to the amount of heat at which we observe. So we have developed a large matrix of experiments. They are underway now at the center here in Salt Lake. And those first round of experiments will run about 3 months. And at that point, we should have a great deal of information about the path which we need to follow to develop a demonstration device.
As you work towards this goal of trying to come up with a demonstration device, how real is the competitive threat that now is evident apparently from Japan and some other countries that that you can stay on top of this and not have them surpass?
Without major federal funding, it will be impossible, literally impossible. I mean, the scope of the experiments that need to be done in that area is enormous. And if you extrapolate what, by the number of scientists which we understand are working on that project in Japan and India, then you can easily come up with hundreds of millions of dollars, anticipate that they're using hundreds of millions of dollars of research funds in this area right now.
Is DOE considering that level of funding, the Department of Energy?
DOE is considering none. Yeah, not a penny. I mean, you know, specifically set aside for this research area. I think they would entertain small individual research projects, but it's going to be too late for that.
Why is that? Why do you believe that there's that level of lack of interest at the federal level in this country?
Apparently we stepped on some toes.
But that's
it's not in our area. It's not, you know, nuclear physics is, we're not nuclear physics.
Why do you say that? I mean, that's a pretty substantial charge.
Well, there's a $500 million being spent annually in that area, and I'm afraid that...
No, I'm quite happy with the spend of that money. I think the research which is being done in the high energy nuclear physics area is splendid. I've always said that it must continue. There are sound physical principles involved, and one wants to see what that type of research can lead to. But there are other pieces of research which have to be carried out, and one mustn't have a very narrow-minded attitude about investigations of novel techniques. And we are not unique in that. I mean, there have been many other proposals to try and induce fusion processes or nuclear reactions in general.
That must be maddening, though, if you believe that that the federal government or some agency would stand in the way of this level of research because perhaps protocol was not followed to the in the norm.
I think that it is just, I would say that the level of funding in the United States of innovative research is too low. And this is just a symptom, and you could cite many other examples. And if the level of funding falls below a certain point, then you will have these controversies.
Do you believe that this conflict that we're seeing now is developing a dangerous precedent, that pure science somehow, new ideas, new concepts, and this philosophy of pure science gets lost in the politics and the jealousies and the egos over money, and the foreign countries take the pure science and run away with it, and run away with the patents and everything else?
Those phenomena have always been part of science policy. This is nothing especially new. I think...
is it getting worse?
Yes, it is getting worse because the level of funding is inadequate. I think it is true to say that the National Science Foundation will only fund 7% of all new applications from new assistant professors. Now, in that situation, you are bound to get many conflicts. This is inevitable. And I think that at some stage, one has to take a cool look at the whole funding policy.
Have you made a specific request to the Department of Energy and been denied that level of, or any level of funding at this point?
We made a request to the Department of Energy, and which in fact was part of the story, the developing story. In the end, we did not take up the funding which was allocated, and in any case, I think the needs now are so large that they cannot be covered by that type of funding mechanism. At some stage, one has to take a decision to investigate the phenomenon in a comprehensive way, and that cannot be covered by the existing mechanisms.
What should, I'm sorry.
Just a follow-up here to Doug's question. What is the risk of the Department of Energy, say, funding a government laboratory, but then the results of that work do not become published, that because it's a government lab and because there may be motives on why that research should be done? I mean, is there a risk that that may happen?